Thank you so very much. I am really, thank you. When I was a kid, 3 years old, my mother gave me what was called expression lessons. Now, you really have to be old to understand and accept and know expression lessons. Now, anybody old enough to remember expression lessons? You expressed yourself. And I had to learn little readings, and I stood up before this expression teacher. Her name was Mrs. O.D. Woodrow, and her home was on the corner of Knox Street and Abbott. There are apartments there now, but that was a big house. And she'd sit at one end of the living room and say, enunciate and project. And so I loved it. I really enjoyed it. And so I majored in speech and theater. And when I graduated, I got married and thought, well, that's the end. But it's always sort of followed me around. I never did seek a place to speak or teach, but it would just come to me. I was really blessed. We were in San Antonio. My husband was in the 4th Army Band at Fort Sam, Houston. And there was a San Pedro Playhouse. So I auditioned, got in a play. And then we moved to Alice, Texas. Does anyone know where Alice is? It's by Corpus Christi. Nobody goes to Alice, Texas, except crooks. I'll tell. Well, everybody knows this story. We got down to Alice. My husband was in the Corpus Christi Symphony. Now, he played with Sammy. Where did you go, dear? Yeah, drummer. My husband was a drummer. Anyway, he played with Sammy when everybody was young. Let's move on. But he was the band director in Alice, Texas, and played in the Corpus Christi Symphony. Because when you're a musician, you have to have several jobs to eat. In fact, when you're a teacher, you're hungry. I used to come home from school, mean teacher, Daddy. I had a mean teacher. And my daddy'd say, they're not mean, they're hungry. And I never knew what he meant till I got the first paycheck. But anyway, Alice is where all of the tombstones voted for Lyndon Johnson. This is all true. You can't make up stuff this good. But Alice, in 1948, Coke Stevenson ran for the Senate seat in Washington, the Senate seat, and Lyndon Johnson ran against Coke Stevenson. Lyndon was in the House, but he wanted to move to the Senate. And so he ran for that Senate seat. And Coke Stevenson won, until Lyndon called his henchman down there in Alice, Texas. He was known as the Duke of Duval County, George Parr, crook to the bone. And he said, now, Lyndon, you haven't lost this race because we haven't voted down here. Yeah. Now, this was 16 days after the election. Now, I'm not bringing anything new. This is in the history books. They write. I'll tell you how they write about it. How they get by with it. Well, it's true for one thing. Anyway, they all went out to the cemetery and voted, and then Box 13 was the precinct. Box 13, where everybody voted in alphabetical order. And this is the history books, by 84 questionable votes, Lyndon Johnson went to the Senate there in Washington. So it was an exciting town. It really was, because George Parr walked the streets, and the First Baptist Church was fine. It was great. They needed a youth director. And I had 2 little children by that time, and I put the playpen in my office, and I became the youth director. And I had a lot of youth there. And then we moved back to Dallas. And I couldn't teach in the Dallas system because my husband did. There was a law. They didn't want the money, salary, money, 2 salaries to go into one family. See, that'd be too much money for one family. We're talking poverty wages here. So I couldn't teach in the Dallas system, but the Catholics wanted me. And I taught at Bishop Dunn High School in Oak Cliff. Anybody from Oak Cliff? When you live in Oak Cliff, you live in Oak Cliff, O. Because people say, where do you live? And you say Oak Cliff, and they go, oh. I know, we live there. We live there. I knew all about it. And anyway, I taught for 6 years, and the speech and theater at Bishop Dunn, the Catholic high school, and that's when Dallas Baptist University opened, and I met you, precious one, 1965. I was just standing there, and Dr. Charles Pitts, who was pastor at Highland Baptist Church, this is how we're all related, Dr. Pitts was asked to be the president of Dallas Baptist, now University. So I went to Dallas Baptist University and taught speech and theater for 12 glorious years. Now, I'd still be there. No one asked me to leave, no. But see, I got a call. You know, you get a call, especially the Baptists. They always have a call. I was called of the Lord. Well, I got this call. I'd been at the college 12 years. I loved it. Kids loved me. We were giving marvelous productions and speech classes. And I have students, raise your hands, other than I have students here because I've spoken to them. Hello, hello. And enunciate and project. I never forgot that. So then I got the call. And I heard the voice on the other end of the line. It was a phone call. Now, you must come and be on my staff. And I said, Dr. Criswell, I have never been called. Oh, I just called you. So I went to First Baptist Church as the single adult director. And I was there 7 years. I'm still a member of the church, but I would still be on the staff. No one asked me to leave, but I got too old to go on ski trips. They get very alarmed when someone on a walker gets on a... So I retired, and by that time I was I was giving speeches, whatever that means. I live one day at a time because I learned that was a happy way to live. It's the way the Lord wants us to live. Matthew 6:34, one day is enough. And it was proven to me really on March 13th, 2020, I gave a speech. And that was the last speech for a year and 4 months. And here I am. You know, everything changed. And people called me and said, you're not speaking. Nobody's meeting. I said, no, I'm not. What are you doing? I'm talking to myself. I wish I'd have said this, but this is Dorothy Parker's statement. Of course I talk to myself. I appreciate a great speaker as an intelligent audience. So I listen to myself a lot and talk to myself, and the Lord's good. The Lord is good. Amen. Yeah, because things are, we just live one day at a time. And the way to true happiness, the guiding light of our lives is from the Beatitudes in Matthew 5, known as a Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes. Now, there are 8 of them, and these are the rules for a joyous. You're not happy in the Lord, you're joyous in the Lord. It's a difference. Joy is much deeper. And the joy comes by living these 8 rules. They're not really rules. They're just a list of the way to joy and a light of the path as you walk, the Beatitudes. Number 1, blessed are the poor in spirit. You say, wait a minute, who wants to be poor in spirit? What that means is there are underdogs everywhere, and you might be one. Anybody want to testify to being an underdog? These people aren't supposed to make it, but they do. I'll volunteer one, my son. He came home from college and said, you just don't know where I'm coming from. My husband said, wherever it is, I paid for it. I know that. I've got to find myself, hunt fast, we're broke. He found himself. He's in Tyler, Texas, plays in the orchestra, plays bass, guitar, at Green Acres. Anybody connected to Green Acres anyway? In Tyler, Texas. I don't know why he's in Tyler, but he's been there over 40 years, so I think he likes it. And his family is there in Tyler, Texas. He was an underdog, should have never made it, but he did. Now, one of my favorite stories is a story of Francis Ouimet, O-U-I-M-E-T. That's a French name. Ouimet. Oh, Mary, we met the French. We met Francis. We met. The Ouimets lived in Montreal, Canada. They were French Canadians. Mr. Ouimet got a better job at Brookline Country Club in Boston, Massachusetts. So he moved the family to Boston. And little Francis, his son, of course, went along, part of the family. Now, what Mr. Ouimet did was work at the country club. He was a greenskeeper. He kept the greens up for all the golfers. And anybody want to testify they're golfing? Any golfers out there? Greens are very important. Golfing, sure. He hated those golfers. Mr. Ouimet, because they trampled on his greens. They were rich. They didn't have anything else to do but play golf. He had to work hard. He had no money. They had everything. He was very upset over the golfers. But little Francis Ouimet, he liked them. They were very nice people. And one day he found a golf ball under a hedge. It had been lost and nobody claimed it. So he took it as his own. He had a golf ball. And he got a broomstick and started playing golf with a broomstick and this lost ball on the greens when his father wasn't looking. And he got to be pretty good. Now, he grew up, he's in high school, and his football coach takes a great interest in him and buys him a set of golf clubs. So by 1913, he thought he was ready, and he entered the U.S. Open as an amateur golfer there at Brookline Country Club. He arrived at the country club, one of the golfers in the Open, and they said, "Where is your caddy?" He said, "Caddy? I'm barely here." And a little boy by the name of Eddie Lowry said, "I'll caddy for you." And he asked, "Do you know the game?" "Oh, yes, I play it with a broomstick and horse apples." Okay. They won. The next year they won. They won and won. He never became a professional golfer, but he became quite well known as an amateur golfer in the U.S. Open. Should have never made it. Eddie Lowry saved his caddy money and bought a couple of Chevrolet dealerships. So he did very well as well. Money isn't everything, but these two succeeded so beautifully. They were underdogs who should have never made it. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall see the Lord. Now, secondly, blessed are not blessed, but those who mourn will be comforted. Those who mourn, the mourners, will be comforted. I want to tell the story of my father, My daddy was a South Texas farm boy and paid his way, worked his way through the University of Texas and graduated in 1917 and went to World War I. Came back. He was on a train going back to South Texas when the train stopped, and the sergeant said, see, they'd been overseas 3 years fighting in France in World War I. Boys, you got a day off here in Dallas before we go on down to South Texas. And it was Sunday, and so my daddy went to church. And there he met my mother, and she never let him go back to South Texas. Because my mother was from Dallas, and she was so proud of it. My mother was born in Dallas in 1894. She saw it all as it grew, the city grew. And so that's all I know. My great-grandmother came to Dallas in 1865. So we are Dallas people, and Daddy became a Dallas person. He always said, I'm from Round Top. It's the smallest post office in Texas. And my mother said, don't say that, Daddy. Tell them you're from Dallas. Well, my daddy was a CPA, and he did fairly well. And never retired because he enjoyed doing taxes and auditing. Were any CPAs out in the audience that love their tax work? And he never retired, but he suffered a stroke in the office and lived only 2 days after that. But he could still write. And I've always said in my speeches, my daddy died and willed me my mother. Well, that's true. He wrote me a letter. He could still write. This is the day before he died. And he said, Dear Rosemary, take care of your mother. I was an only child, so yes, take care of your mother. And let there be no long mourning for me, for I will be with Jesus Christ. And signed his name. Now, I don't have that letter. I gave it to the attorney who was probating his will. He said, I've never seen anything like this before, and I want to keep it. And I said, well, you can have it. So it was a very marvelous experience, and Daddy's up in heaven with Jesus Christ. He knew it. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Now, blessed are the meek. Who wants to be meek? Well, these people are not meek. What it means is they have strength, but they control it. They're able to use their strength when needed. And I'm going to tell the story, one of these stories I just discovered in a new book about Texas, 2 stories of slaves. Now, slavery was an awful, awful thing. But here are 2 stories of slaves that are quite moving. Now, this one, I just read about it in this new history book on Texas, about Texas. It's titled Big Wonderful Thing. And it's 900 pages of Texas history. Do not read it in bed. If you'd go to sleep, it would fall on you and crush you to death. He tells the story of Jeffrey Hamilton, a young slave boy of Sam Houston's. Now, Sam Houston lived to be an old, old man. Of course, a whole program can be done on Sam Houston. I love to tell about his finding the Lord. He accepted the Lord, and his wife led him to the Lord. And Rufus C. Burleson was the pastor at First Baptist Church, Houston, Texas, where Sam where he accepted the Lord. Rufus C. Burleson, first president of Baylor University in Waco, when it was in Waco. There's a beautiful statue of Rufus C. Burleson on the Baylor campus that pigeons will not fly over in deep respect of this Baptist leader. He led Sam to the Lord and baptized him in the river down there in Houston. Said, Sam, your sins are washed away. And Sam said, God help the fish. Sam completely changed. Well, he had this young slave boy. Sam was very disturbed over the fact that Texas joined the Confederacy. Sam wanted us to be a nation once again and stay out of that war. And just let him lead us as he did as a republic. We'll do that again and stay. Well, Texas joined the Confederacy. Broke the heart of Sam Houston. He went home to Huntsville and died of a broken heart. Of course, he lives on Highway 45. If you're driving south, you don't see that statue. It's behind a bush. But if you're driving north, he's in the middle of the highway. I know people who have found the Lord driving north on I-45. Oh, Lord, I'm here. Yes, Lord. Oh, it's Sam Houston. Sam had this slave boy named Jeff Hamilton, and he was interviewed many times because Sam freed him, and then Sam died, and Jeffrey Hamilton became an industrious young man. And he went to Belton, Texas after the Civil War and worked for Mary Hardin Baylor College, now university. And he would tell about Texas and its history. And they gave him an honorary degree. Well, he deserved it. He lived with Sam Houston. You couldn't have a better teacher of Texas history. So Jeff Hamilton, I think that's a great story of a young man who did well. Sad to be a slave, but after being freed, he made something of himself. The other is Paul Jennings. Now, Paul Jennings was James Madison's slave, and he wrote a book titled The Slave in the White House. He was very well educated, and when James Madison became president of the United States, he brought with him to the White House Paul Jennings, because he just couldn't live without Paul. He was his right-hand man. And Paul Jennings was with Dolly Madison when the British invaded the White House. Dolly loved to cook. We still eat some of her donuts and cupcakes. She had dinner ready for James, and they said, he's not coming, Dolly. The British are. You must leave. And she and Paul Jennings left the White House, and supposedly she grabbed that big, huge portrait of George Washington, of Stuart's portrait of Washington, and saved it because the British burned down the White House. By the way, the British general ate the dinner and then burned down the White House. And Paul Jennings said, no, Mrs. Madison could have never lifted that portrait off the wall. No, she couldn't carry it. I did it. I saved the portrait of George Washington. Well, when James Madison died, he was there with Paul Jennings. And Paul Jennings, still a slave, had to be sold by Mrs. Madison, because Mrs. Madison, she was a widow with a rotten kid when she met James, and James Madison never told her how rotten her son was. He kept that from her. The son's name, by the way, was Pain. Don't you love that? A rotten kid named Pain. And he had spent all of their money, and James never told Dolly what this son had done. So when James died, she was penniless, and she had to sell the house and sell Paul Jennings to this orator, this speaker that was known well in Washington at that time, and his name was Daniel Webster. Daniel Webster bought Paul Jennings, freed him. Paul Jennings went into business and supported Mrs. Madison. Isn't that that's a great story. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those that seek righteousness. Now that's something we all want. We want to be righteous, right? Such a righteous individual. I wanted my children to be righteous. So I reared them as my mother reared me. My mother just scared the devil out of me. She would tell me, she said, now there's a booger man, not a boogie man, but a booger man, under the bed, and when you misbehave, he comes out and he will eat you up. And I believed her. I laughed so when my children were little. There was a television show here in Dallas, some of you might remember it, Officer Friendly. Do you remember Officer Friendly? He was a policeman. Well, we had Officer Terrify. Because I came home from school one day and I said, Mama, I saw a policeman and I tiptoed by. See, I was scared. The beginning of the wisdom, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. You fear the Lord, you're wise. Fear, it's good to put into kids. My mother put it into me, and I put it into my children. Scared them to death. Now, I was very fortunate in the acting field. You know, that my daddy a CPA. What are you going to major in, Rosemary? Theater. Ugh. What's that? But I was young during the dinner theater days. Remember the dinner theaters? Yeah, they were everywhere. And they would use the local yokels, the actors and actresses, the local ones, and bring in has-been stars to star in those shows. Now, they went broke because they began to cut back on food. And people went to eat. They didn't care about the play. They wanted to see, we're going out to eat. And who cares about a play? So I was very fortunate. I did quite a bit of work in the dinner theaters. And I was called one time to be the mother of the star who was Kooky Ed Burns. Remember him? Kooky, lend me your comb. He had this hair. 77, Sunset Strip. Well, I played his mother. We were the same age, but that's all right. I always played the character roles. And I was in this show with Kooky Ed Burns, and I took him out to Dallas Baptist. Oh, my students were so thrilled to meet Kooky. Well, my daughter, Jill, asked if she could come to the show one night. Well, those shows were just farcical, sweet little story. Kids could come. You know, nowadays you have to think, now could a kid see the? Well, yeah, anybody. They were just funny shows. Sure, Jill, you can come. Well, she came. And that evening, at intermission, a man dropped dead in the audience. Well, they, of course, stopped the show and hauled him off. Then they said, you want us to go on with the show? Yeah, we didn't know him. Yeah, we... Okay. So we finished the show, and I'm backstage, and I come to get Jill in the dining room, and she's about 10 years old, and she is standing by the table where this man had dropped dead. And she said, Mama, you are right. Look at this table. Cigarettes, liquor. You smoke, you drink, you die. I said, I told you so. This is proof positive. So keep those kids from drinking and smoking. Scare the devil out of them. Blessed are the merciful, for they will have mercy. One of the most beautiful stories of a president of the United States and his love of the Lord and his mercy is the story of Zachary Taylor. Zachary Taylor. Nobody knows Zachary Taylor. He was president of the United States, but he was only president for 2 years, and he died. It was rather sad. He was going to keep us out of war. He was going to make certain the Civil War didn't take place. He was loved up north, but he was a Southerner. So he was just perfect for the presidency, and he was elected. Zachary Taylor. Unfortunately, as I said, he died. He was elected in 1848, and in 1850, he was president 2 years. He had a big party on the 4th of July to lay the cornerstone of the Washington Monument. He overate on ice cream and died the next day of indigestion. His wife pleaded with him. Now, Zach, you've had enough. One more bowl, honey, then he's gone. And that was really sad because he was going to keep us out of war. But nevertheless, he was elected, and in those days, the inauguration was in March 4th. See, an amendment moved it to January. But in 1848, it was in March, on March 4th. And that was a Sunday. And Zachary Taylor said, we are not going to have an inauguration on God's day. What? What are we going to do? The president goes out at noon on Sunday. You're not going to be president until Monday. That's right. But what are we going to do? I don't know. But we are not going to have an inauguration on God's holy day of rest, the Sabbath day. So they got the Speaker of the House to be president for 1 day. This story's not told too often, but we had a president that served 1 day. His name was David Atchison. He was from Missouri. That's Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe. And he served 1 day. And they asked him, what did you do? He said, it was Sunday, I rested. We had a real God-fearing, lovely, marvelous president in Zachary Taylor, but he liked ice cream. By the way, somebody had him exhumed. A couple of years ago, you may have read about it. We want him exhumed. He was poisoned. Well, he could have been poisoned because, see, he was a Southerner that everybody up north liked. And this country was splitting. And somebody could have poisoned him. And they dug him up, and there it was. Bluebell put him back. Sorry about that. So. Blessed are the pure in heart. Now, this is a real challenge to every one of us at this time, to be pure in heart. And I think about my precious, blessed school teacher, Dr. William Bonney at the University of North Texas. Any mean green out there that wish to wave their hands? No mean, I see one, bless you, North Texas. Dr. Bonney, he was a head of the psychology department, and he conducted a survey, a test to see why good kids are good. See, nobody ever studies kids that are good. You know, that's a good kid over there. Good for him. That kid's going to prison. Study him, find out why he's in prison. See, they make all these studies. Go down to the prison, go down to the detention home, go down there, see why those kids are all locked up. Find out why. Why are you locked up? Well, my mother ran off, my father was a drunk. See, there you go. What about you? Well, my mother ran off, my father's a drunk. See, there. Parents, they count. What about you? Why are you locked up? Mother was a drunk, father ran off. Oh. Now we're going to question kids that are doing very well. Never in trouble, always abiding by the rules. Kid, why are you so fine? Oh, I have marvelous parents. See, put it down, parents. Next. Why are you so good? Marvelous parents. There you go. Put it down. Parents, marvelous parents, good. What about you? Well, my mother was a drunk. My father ran off. Wait a minute. You're supposed to be in prison. Why aren't you in prison? Because there was somebody in my life that cared. Now, see, it was a lady next door, a vacation Bible school teacher, a teacher in school, a coach, a preacher, somebody. They all had this one person. I would never have made it had it not been for this person. Not a parent, but a person. And who were they? Those people, those persons, us. We can be somebody's somebody always and lead them to the Lord. The Lord's put us on this earth for that reason. So we are to guide these kids, help people, yes, and they will be righteous and pure in heart. Blessed are the pure in heart. Now the pacemakers. Oh, well, I teach a Bible study, and we were talking about Rahab, and I called her Rehab. Well, and you begin to slip, finally. When you're old, you're slipping. I asked somebody, I said, how's Mrs. So-and-so? Slipping. And I thought, yeah, we all are, so. But the Peacemakers, I think of Harry Truman. I'm going to select Harry Truman, his story. Harry Truman became president when Roosevelt died, and he knew nothing about anything. Roosevelt never shared anything with Harry Truman, the vice president. He just didn't. And suddenly, he's president. Now, in 1933, Einstein came from Germany, driven out, escaped, really, from Nazi Germany and came to Princeton University. And he spoke to the President of the United States, Franklin Roosevelt, and said, I can make a bomb. And Roosevelt said, make it. And Einstein stayed in New Jersey at Princeton. Enrico Fermi went to Chicago. I'm going to tell this story, Roberta. Where's Roberta? Do you mind if I tell the story of the drum? The big drum at Texas? That's your family that... Enrico Fermi was sent by Einstein to the University of Chicago to work on the bomb. See, Einstein stayed in Princeton, New Jersey. Fermi was in Chicago. And then Robert Oppenheimer was down in White Sands, New Mexico. And that was called the Manhattan Trio or Manhattan Project, Triangle. And they created the atomic bomb. Now, when the reason Fermi was in Chicago, the University of Chicago quit playing football. They said, we don't like football. It's finished. We're finished. We're just going to be a school. And they said, oh, okay. And they said, what are we going to do with this big drum? Well, throw it in the closet in there. Then here comes Fermi, and he uses the stadium for his lab to work on that atomic bomb. And when they dropped the bomb, we'll get to that in a minute. I didn't know I was going to tell this story, but Roberta is here, and this is part of her family. They got that drum out of that closet. They said, what are we going to do with it? Well, D. Harold Bird bought the drum, amen? Bought the drum, sent it down to the University of Texas. Now, come on, testify, you UT people. That's Big Bertha. Yeah. And when Vincent DeNino was the band director, and he told my husband, he said, that drum came to Austin, and it was radioactive. It screwed up all the electricity in Austin. See, it'd been in the closet with the atomic bomb. I just love... They had to deactivate it before they could roll it out on the field. Aren't you thrilled you came today? I didn't know I was going to tell that story. But anyway, the Birds bought the drum, and that's Big Bertha. But that bomb was created, and Harry Truman becomes president. Now, at when he became president, the men were already stationed on those ships, and they were ready to invade the mainland of Japan. It was going to be another D-Day, a bloodbath. It was going to be horrible. So Harry Truman contacted Japan, Imperial Japan, their leadership, and said, "We've got a bomb that can destroy you. Please surrender. We do not want to invade your mainland. It'll be an awful battle." Anybody have a grandfather, father, anybody that was on one of those ships, seeing that it was called off because Harry Truman allowed those two bombs, or ordered those two bombs to be dropped, and ended World War II. Now, he did something else. He knew that Adolf Hitler gained his power because Europe had been destroyed in World War I. They were destroyed. And this man, Adolf Hitler, stood up and said, "I can get us out of this. I can bring us to peace and prosperity." And horrible man. And it caused World War II. Now, Europe is destroyed once again, this time by World War II. And it was Harry Truman who created what he called the Marshall Plan, and America went over and rebuilt Europe. Anybody my age that goes to Europe and meets somebody my age, they'll always say, "We love America," because we were rebuilt by America. We did that for the world. Harry Truman ended World War II, rebuilt Europe, and he did something else. He created the state of Israel. Someone asked Harry, "Did you have anything to do with creating the state of Israel?" That was in 1948. I went to Israel in 1998 and celebrated 50 years of Israel. They were celebrating 50 years. "Did you have anything to do with the founding of the state of Israel, Harry?" Harry Truman said, "Anything to do with it? I'm King Cyrus." Read Ezra, Nehemiah, and there will be the story of King Cyrus, who said, "Children of Israel, you can go back home, and I'm going to go back with you and help you build your temple." So a great peacemaker was Harry Truman. Now the last is those that are persecuted. You're supposed to keep your mouth shut, right, and just accept persecution. This is a story of somebody that didn't keep their mouth shut. It's a great story. Persecuted, but fought back. Good story. Texas story. I love Texas stories. This is a story of Robert Lee King. Edna Ferber met him, and when she wrote Giant, she patterned that rancher after Robert Lee King, who owned the largest ranch in the world, the King Ranch. Now, he was a mean old guy, tough rancher, didn't kill anybody, but he was mean, and owned all that property, bred those cows. But he was also a sailor, and he had this huge yacht in the harbor of Corpus Christi. And one day he went sailing, and he was sailing out of the harbor, and he almost ran into a little boat filled with Presbyterian missionaries. And it scared him to death. As I said, he wasn't a killer, and it scared him. He could have killed everybody on that little boat with his big boat, and he was able to save everything, but they were in his way. That little boat was in his way, and it made him so mad. He stood there on the deck of that yacht, and cursed, you so-and-so and so-and-so, and so I could have killed you, blah, 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 cuss, cuss. Name of the Lord in vain, cuss, cuss. Well, this darling, charming little Presbyterian missionary girl stood on the deck of that little ship and said, "You awful man, don't you ever take the name of the Lord in vain again, ever." And he was stunned when someone talked back to him. He said, "Who is that?" And he married her. Isn't that a great story? I love that. That's Henrietta King, who built hospitals, schools, churches in that ranch and took care of all of those vaqueros who were working on the ranch. She took care of Miss Henrietta, and they married a Clayburgh. See, all those names are named after that large family, the King family. And one of their daughters, by the way, was Alice. See, Alice is down there. Alice, Texas, remember? I can't forget it. So Henrietta, Alice, Kingsville, Kennedy, Clayburgh, those little towns are all named for that huge family that still owns, and operates that ranch. Elie Wiesel was a German Jew, just recently died, who survived the Holocaust. He was in a camp, concentration camp, and suffered so greatly. But he survived. And they asked him, "Why did you survive and so many people didn't?" And he said, "Because they looked down and I looked up. And the only way to live is looking up, thinking of our Lord there in heaven, who's taking good care of us, and remembering these 8 ways to walk in the light of the Lord." Thank you so much for inviting me. Really appreciate it. Thank you, thank you. Oh, thank you.